Hey, what's up, y'all? What it do? What's poppin'? What's on and poppin'? How you be? How you living? I'm so happy that you guys decided to join me for part 4 of the story of us. Y'all, it has been a journey and a half. I mean, some of these things, just talking about them out loud, need a second. But no, in all honesty, it's been amazing. It's been exciting. It's been a little challenging, but it's really been rewarding. And I'm so glad that God's getting the glory. And I know that there's something there for you to receive and just to be built up on, to be transformed by, for the trajectory of your life to just completely be shifted, and for you to have the power that you need in order to overcome anything and everything that you are going through. But especially things that relate to or are similar to, the stories and experiences that I am speaking about here. So if you haven't, please go back and watch part 1, 2, and 3. Take something in, and when you're done, come on over to part 4 and join us. But without any further ado, let's get into this testimony. Y'all ever have a first love? And I don't mean like your first kiss or your first shabang bang, you know what I'm saying? Not even your first relationship, but your first love. Remember all those warm butterfly feelings that you get when you thought about them, or like were talking to them, or when they walked into a room? Remember how you felt like you couldn't breathe without them sometimes, and the thought of even losing them, you couldn't even bear it, because then what? A life filled with sorrow and gloom and doom because you've lost your soulmate? Who wants that? Well, I do. I remember that love very vividly. And I also remember the earth-shattering and heartbreaking realization that I had when I finally realized what comes along with loving someone with an all-consuming love who you were never intended to love in the first place. What I want to share with you all today is a little bit about what my relationship with my first love was like, and how God, or how that brought me to a place where I now love Jesus above everyone. Now, my ex, my first love, he was smooth. He was funny. And, he could be a charmer at times too. He loved God. And he loved his family. And he always wanted to see other people happy. And he was the type of person who always wanted to ensure that the people that he cared about were good. He was that type of person who would always just message you randomly and be like, "You good? You all right?" Just to check in. That was him. Now, when things first started out, they seemed perfect. Of course, they seemed perfect. And, he was a great guy, a good guy with a good heart, loved God. And, I was a good girl, and I was trying to be a good Christian girl and working on my relationship with Christ, and, in tandem, also giving myself to this relationship. We would read our Bibles together. We would pray together. We would even go to church together. And not too long into the relationship, things started to take a turn. And not necessarily a turn that I initially realized, but it was a turn in which I started to head in the wrong direction. It got to the point where instead of doing the right things together, we were doing all the wrong things together. And then I started to get to a point where I was craving those wrong things more than I was craving God. I'm just gonna be real with y'all. There was a point where there was no more couples Bible studies taking place, y'all. It got to the point where we would smoke weed, get high, and either just hang out listening to reggae tunes all day, or hop in the car and drive somewhere and just post up, talking, having conversation about anything and everything while listening to some reggae tunes. That was his favorite genre, I think. And on top of that, as much as I would like to say this happened on rare occasions, when we would meet up, we would also engage in sexual relations. In all transparency, y'all, my past life of fornication had no bounds. I would literally wake up. I lived cities away, okay? Wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, okay? Just to take a bus and get to his house at a time where no one would really notice. And, I was in school at the time, and I would literally lie to my family and tell them that I was on my way to placement each morning, when in actuality I was on my way to engage in the shebang bang. And that's another thing. I lied all the time. I became an avid liar, y'all. I was lying all the time. And I found that the more that I was giving myself over to these things in the relationship, was the more that I had to lie just to cover up this life of sin. I remember there was a time that I completely disobeyed God, and I went somewhere with him that I was not supposed to. And because of that, we both almost lost our lives. So, a friend of mine was celebrating her birthday, and she was living in London, Ontario at the time. So she invited me to come and celebrate with her. And this is actually the same friend from part 2. So y'all should go back and watch that, get a little background story on her. But yeah, she invited me down there. Now, God clearly told me not to go on this trip. But specifically also not to go with my ex. But I didn't listen. I went on the trip and I took my ex with me. And when we first got there, everything was okay. It wasn't until we were heading out to go and party that things took a turn. Now, I know and trust and believe that my ex loved God, and he wanted to continue working on his relationship with God, as we all do. But after enduring some heartbreaking realities in his life, I believe that he started to look and seek love and comfort and acceptance from other things above God. Now, because we were together, I started to do the same thing. I started drinking again. I started smoking again. I even went back to a place that I know God had freed me from. where I relied on the love and comfort of a man to give me what I needed and show me who I am, who I'm supposed to be. Now, I knew that God was telling me to leave this relationship, and I would. I did multiple times. But unfortunately, we were the type of couple that went from off again to on again, and then from on again to off again, over and over and over again. Each time it would be me breaking it off, because I knew what God was calling me to. So I would give him that typical, response in that we need to talk conversation. And it was, I want to focus on my relationship with God. And he would give that typical guy response of, really. At some point, I'd end up caving and we'd pick up right where we left off. Now, this toxic cycle continued for a couple years. Anyways, back to my story. He, myself, my friend, and a bunch of her friends were all headed downtown London to party and go clubbing. Now, on our way there, he and I got into a major fight, in which I saw a side of him that, looking back, I had encountered before. A side of him that God had warned me about. But I just had never seen it at that extent or to that extent before that night. That night, I saw what I know to have been a spiritual manifestation of the dark, wicked influences that were attempting to take his mind and his life. There was a point that night after we got into that major fight where he got so angry and he hit me. And I don't even think he realized what he did at first. At that point, I saw something in his eyes that made me want to run. So I did. He chased me, and we argued more. And then he walked away, and I chased him, and we argued some more. And that went on for a while. Yeah, it went on for a while until something in my spirit shifted. In the midst of him raising his voice beyond anything I had ever seen before, in the midst of him throwing my things and lashing out at me, I felt scared. But I also felt hopeless. Completely hopeless. It felt like all that time and energy that I had put into that relationship, into being loved and into loving someone with all of me, it felt like it was no longer a relationship that was feeding me, but it was killing me. I just remember in that moment turning in the opposite direction and bolting it, just running. And mind you, we're downtown London in a city we both don't even know. So I didn't know where I was. I didn't know where I was going. I remember it so vividly. I stood in the middle of a parking lot and stared up at the dark pitch black sky, and I had a breakdown. I had a mental breakdown, and I screamed at the top of my lungs, and I said, Jesus, Jesus. I called his name and I said it 3 times specifically. I remember just standing there after that, just crying, looking up, literally waiting for Jesus to appear in front of me and help me. And I remember there were people just walking by, just on their way to the bars and to the clubs, wondering what the heck is going on with this girl. I remember this couple had stopped and they came up to me, ran up to me, and they're asking me like, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" And I couldn't even explain to them what happened, what was wrong, because it was so much more than just a fight with my boyfriend. In that moment, it was a fight for my life. It was a fight for my soul. I started heading in the direction of the club, just to find my friends and try and get out of there. And I remember being stopped by these 3 guys. And to this day, whoever I share this story with, I always tell them that God sent 3 angels to save my life that night, because he did. They literally came out of nowhere. They appeared on the street corner and they were preaching the gospel to anyone and everyone who would listen. It was mainly young people who were going out to party with their friends, and they were young as well. And they just stood there preaching Jesus. And I remember their names vividly. They were Chase, Jeremy, and Jason. I remember Chase asking me what I wanted from God. And I just said I wanted to come back to Jesus. I told him that God specifically told me not to come there. And I did. And I disobeyed him. And it's been the worst night of my life. And I just want God to save me. They ended up covering me in prayer and just speaking a word of encouragement to me. And I knew that God was still watching over me. But I also knew I needed to get out of there. So I went to go and find my friend, the friend who was celebrating her birthday, the one from part 2. Again, if you haven't checked it out, go check it out. Now, when I found her, she was, of course, drunk and completely drugged out. And I just explained everything that happened to her. I was crying hysterically, hyperventilating, explaining that I just needed to get out of there. And I just wanted to go home. She, on the other hand, did not want to do that because it was her birthday weekend and nothing was going to get in the way of that. Not even her friend who was in need of her friend, unfortunately. Y'all, I was very angry with her and her response, and the fact that it seemed like she did not care about me, her friend, and my well-being. over having a good night. And I started yelling at her. And in a nutshell, I basically told her that she was a selfish friend and only cared about herself. Now, as crazy as this sounds, she ended up hitting me that night as well. She slapped me across my face real good. Would have continued to if some people hadn't pulled her off, but yeah, I cried. Definitely shed a tear or two. And it was just because it was a lot, and that just became the cherry on top of what was already the worst night of my life. It was like a double whammy, and I just knew in that moment that I needed to get out of there. And not just out of there as in London, but out of there as in out of both of those relationships. Y'all, after I got KO'd, okay, I wasn't KO'd, I wasn't on the ground, but after I got knocked in the face, I stumbled back and I was disoriented because I just wasn't expecting that. And I remember turning to my side and having someone hold me up and catch me. And I turned around and it was Chase, the guy who just prayed for me. Mind you, I'm way on a different side of the downtown London area that we were at in comparison to where I had met him. So in my mind, I'm just thinking, bruh, where did you come from? But I'm also trying to take in the fact that I was just hit. So yeah, that was a lot. And yeah, that was just another reason why I knew they were angels who God had sent for me, because every time I needed help, they just appeared out of nowhere. And if that wasn't enough, he then said, I'm going to call you a cab. I'm going to wait here with you, and I'm going to make sure you get in the cab safely. And then I'm going to pay for your cab, and I'm going to tell your cab where he ought to take you. And I'm going to make sure you get home safe tonight, because you need to go home and you need to leave this place. And that's what he did. And that's what happened. I got in the cab and I left. And I went back to her place. Now, as bad as all of that sounds, things only got way worse. And with that said, stay tuned for part 5 of The Story of Us.